I was in Vancouver, and that's when Prabhupada left his body, November 14th, 1977.
You were the Sankirtan leader at that time?
Yeah, right. And Satsvarup was the GBC, and Gopal Krishna Maharaj were also the GBCs at that time. They were the Baudak was the temple president.
So, after 77, what happened? What did you notice after you got the news that Srila Prabhupada has left the planet?
Well, we were all devastated. We were devastated when Prabhupada left, his body, because we obviously missed Prabhupada. And at that time, nobody really knew what was going on, because we were all isolated. Nobody knew what was going on in Vrindavan at the time, unless you were there. And then even if you were there, those devotees, those few devotees that were there, that weren't part of this whole thing that was going on in ISKCON, the conspiracy basically of these gurus, the few devotees that were there that knew about it, they got kicked out of the movement eventually, quickly, and then they went to different parts of the world, and then most devotees didn't even know what they knew until many, many years later, like when the July 9th letter came out. And then when the letter books came out, this was there was only 500 copies of the original letter books, and somehow or another I got a copy of that book, and I started reading these letters, and these books were banned in ISKCON. It's another whole story about that. So as more devotees started to find out what was going on, we put together the pieces of this puzzle, and then the conversation, the May 28th conversation came out, and then there was 4 versions of this tape, and it's hard to figure out which one was real or not. So gradually, as the whole thing started to unfold, we start to put the pieces of this puzzle together, and then we gradually understood what Prabhupada wanted. Because we were kept in the dark.
How can you say there were many devotees in Vrindavan, and probably there could have been some communication flow? Why do you say that there was no one knew what was that in? Like, for instance, July 9th letter, it was should have been mailed to your president in Canada.
Right, but we
Did
never
he
saw
not
it.
Get it.
We never saw it.
Did he get it?
I don't think so. Because if he got it, we would have seen it. Because all of us wanted to know, everybody wanted to know what was going to happen after Prabhupada left.
There was no issue of communication between you and the temple president?
No, I was friends with the temple president, but he never got the letter.
He never got
I never heard of any devotees. Nobody knew about this letter for many, many years. It wasn't until early 90s, that letter was made public.
Subsequently, have you checked with other temple presidents who were presidents in around July 9th and post July 9th, 77? Did any of them say that they had received the letter?
I can't remember any that said they got the letter.
So do you suspect that it was not sent out after Srila Prabhupada signed it at all?
I think that's what happened. Right. I don't think anybody got this letter. And maybe a few people got it, but the general consensus among devotees was that, what they were told by the GBC, that Prabhupada appointed these people as gurus. And that took, from Prabhupada's leaving, November, December, January, February, March, the next Scorpion Festival, they had all this time to come up with their story, and it should have been said right away. Prabhupada always did everything clearly. He wrote everything down. And this Ritvik system of initiations was going on for 5 years before Prabhupada left his body. But this was all, everything was new. We didn't know what was going on because we basically trusted these leaders.
How do you say for 5 years the Ritvik system was going on? Because the letter was not there, the word Ritvik was not there.
Right.
How do you
because
say that?
I know it is because I read this letter Prabhupada wrote, I think it was January 3rd, 1972, to some leader in America, and at that point he said it was too much problem for him to chant on everybody's beads and give them a name, so he appointed these devotees, these leaders in America to start.
Was one of them.
Yeah, Kirtananda was one of them, to start initiating devotees on Prabhupada's behalf. So that was 5 years before Prabhupada left his body. So, and we knew that. Everybody knew that. That's how I got initiated. I was with Prabhupada several times, but I didn't get personally initiated by him. The temple president, Sukadeva, was my temple president, and I got initiated by him in 1974, but nobody ever thought that the temple president was your guru. Everybody knew Prabhupada was the guru, even though the temple president was doing the initiation on behalf of Prabhupada. And that went on all over the world. And most of the disciples never met Prabhupada. Yeah, I met him before I even joined the temple. I wanted to personally see him. So I hitchhiked all the way from Seattle down to Los Angeles. And then when I met Prabhupada, I was a photographer at the time, and I was in this temple room. I was still a hippie. I had hair, beard, and I was going to the Seattle temple for a while, and I was reading Prabhupada's books, and I thought, I have to meet this man that's writing these books. So I hitchhiked, because I didn't think my car would make it. So it took me 3 days to get to L.A. I got there at 3 o'clock in the morning and laid my sleeping bag down. I got about an hour's sleep, and somebody wakes me up. So I rub my eyes, I go into the temple room, and then Prabhupada's sitting there on the Vyasa sign. There's like 500 devotees, Jai Prabhupada, Prabhupada. And I'm looking at Prabhupada through my telephoto lens. You know, I was a photographer at the time, and I'm thinking in my mind, this place is intense. You know, it's so intense. I got to get out of here. It's just too much. You know, it's too much power in this place. Then I'm thinking, but I know I'm coming back. And as soon as I thought that, it's like all the crowd parted. And then Prabhupada looked right through that crowd, right through my lens, right into my eyes while I was thinking this. And I thought, wow, he read my mind. And I couldn't look at him. The glance from Prabhupada was so powerful. It was like a laser. And I thought, I couldn't look at him. You know, he was just too powerful. So I looked away. And then I thought, he can read my mind. Because as soon as I thought, I'm leaving, but I'm coming back, and Prabhupada looked at me. And that was the first connection, the first personal connection I had with Prabhupada. Then I came back to Seattle. This is another story. Everything I had was gone. My girlfriend was gone, my pet dog was gone, and the gas was on in the apartment. And there was a Dear John letter on the table. This never happened to me in my life. You know, it was like Krishna was just taking everything off the table of my material life. He cleared everything away, so it was real easy to surrender after that point. Well, there's no question of the presence of Prabhupada is different. I mean, they're both the same. The Vani and the Vapu is the same, but when you meet Prabhupada physically, it's a powerful experience. But it's nothing like meeting anybody else who's not as powerful as Prabhupada. But, so it's like when we were around Prabhupada, you know, all of us have problems. We all have anxieties and problems. When you were with Prabhupada, you had no problems. That was the aura that surrounded Prabhupada. Your anxieties were gone. You know, you're just around Prabhupada and you could feel it. So that experience, I mean, you can't minimize the physical presence of Prabhupada. But Prabhupada has also explained that the real association with him is through his Vani, through his words, and not the physical association, because you can have all kinds of experiences. You know, there's all kinds of charismatic people. Hitler had charisma. He had millions of people following him. Napoleon, you know, all kinds of world leaders, they all have charisma. But the real thing is to associate with the spiritual master by his words. That's the real association. Because the physical association, it's here for some time and then it's gone. So how many got it? Very few. Most of the Prabhupada's disciples never even saw him and never even met him. Yet they became disciples of Prabhupada through his books. So even if I hadn't met Prabhupada, I still would have become a devotee because I read his books. And it actually took me 2 months. I was going every day to the Seattle temple, and the temple president and I'd read Bhagavad Gita at home, and I'd bring a list of questions. And then during the class, any questions, I raise my hand and I ask all these questions. Then after class, we go out in the hall, and I go at it again with them. And you know, sometimes we'd argue back and forth, myself and the temple president. And this went on for like 2 months. And after 2 months of this question and answer, and them stuffing me with prasadam at the same time, after 2 months of that, I couldn't find any reason not to surrender. You know, I ran out of excuses to be in Maya, and I was convinced of the philosophy. So at that point, there's no alternative but to surrender to Krishna. It was a while. I don't know the exact date, but
Approximately.
it was months after.
78?
Yeah, it was. You know, I'm not exactly sure when
After
it was.
the Gaur Purnima mostly.
Yeah, well, that's when the official thing came out. You know, because I've heard these stories from other people, like Jasodananda was telling me, and Hamza Duda. You know, he was personally there. I heard this directly from him, how these gurus got together in Vrindavan and they made basically a meeting amongst themselves, and Satsvarupa was giving the questions and the answers, and as a prompt, you know, like when you're watching, you're on TV and you got a prompter underneath, you're saying what the prompter's saying. Right. So that's basically what Satsvarupa was doing with these gurus, saying, you're all going back to your zones, and we all have to be on the same page with this Guru Tattva, so here's the questions and here's the answers. So that's basically what they did, before that next Gorpani meeting. And it worked for a while. It worked for a while, but then gradually we put together the pieces of the puzzle, and eventually all this information comes out, and then devotees finally figured it out, what was going on. So it took a while. It took a while. I often wondered the same thing, because I remember early on I was reading Prabhupada's books, and he would say right in his books that there'll be sometimes demons in the garb of devotees in this Hare Krishna movement. And I was thinking, what is he talking about? Everybody I knew was a wonderful devotee. Because we were up in Vancouver, and Vancouver is kind of like a small corner of the world. And, we didn't get a lot of international traveling devotees coming through there. Once in a while, some sannyasis. And we're kind of isolated, and Seattle was the same way. It wasn't like a big city like Los Angeles, where it's an international headquarters, where a lot of travel and interaction. So, we just didn't know what was going on. We had no idea what was going on. But gradually, you hear from devotees, and gradually the pieces of the puzzle came together, and we finally started to figure out this thing, how it played out. Well, before that, it was all the fall downs of these gurus, and then there was this guru formery system. And Baudak, the temple president, flew. I think it was New Vrindavan, was it, where they had the first meeting?
85.
Yeah, he flew there, and him and this is when Rabindra Swarup was on the bandwagon, because it was still I was still in Vancouver, right? And we really didn't know what was going on, because it really didn't affect us that much there, in Vancouver. But still, Satsrup was coming, and Gopal Krishna was coming, and they were initiating new people at the time. But nobody really knew what was going on, what Prabhupada said at this time, because these people weren't telling us. They had their own agenda. They knew what was going on, but they weren't telling us. So gradually, as time came, then we finally figured out what was going on, because you just couldn't keep it from everybody. Krishna revealed this to everybody.
Do you see the email and the internet that helped to disseminate that information much more quickly all over the world than before the pre-internet email days?
Definitely. Right, and there was papers written, but Sotananda, he wrote a lot of papers, Pranjan, Rupa Vilas, and then the Ritvik debate. Mm-hmm. You ever seen that in 1991 in San Diego? Mm-hmm. And most devotees never even saw that. That was just like a local thing in Southern California. And first of all, because the tape was banned, they wouldn't allow that in any temple. And unless you knew people that were there, or knew some friends of the devotees, you didn't even hear about that either. So there was definitely a clamping down of disseminating this information, even though some things were going on. Like that was a classic event. That was like a once in a lifetime thing, when these devotees, the Ritviks and the ISKCON people, got together and debated this issue, and it was clearly, that when you look at this tape, the Ritviks totally defeated these bogus gurus. They couldn't say anything. But then they banned that tape.
That was in 81.
91.
1990, January.
90, yeah.
January 14th,
San Diego.
1990.
Yeah, he was there. And I didn't see that until later either. You just hear about this because all the temples are so isolated. There was no computers, there was no emails at this time. And we didn't, unless you were connected with somebody personally at that time, you didn't hear about it either. So when a lot of papers were written and then disseminated, unless you really wanted to know what was going on, you were out of that loop. If you wanted to know, then Krishna would help you. That's really what it boils down to. Because even now, this information's out there, and some people don't have it because they don't want to know it. But if you want to know it, then Krishna will give it to you.